Pimp was living the dream. The whole 9 yards, a well-paying business, a home that could be mistaken for a small mansion, a wife that was equal parts gorgeous and caring, and 3 kids that were the perfect blend of cheeky and cute. Life was as wholesome as a family sitcom until it wasn't. One day, while checking our bank statement, I noticed charges from Care.com popping up more often than pimples on a teenager. My wife had been leaving our children with a sitter almost daily, something that was highly unusual considering her maternal devotion. With curiosity gnawing at me, I decided to do some snooping, the kind that would make a private detective proud. As she lay in bed, emitting gentle snores that sounded like a congested Chewbacca, I crept over to her nightstand and swiped her phone. I felt like a regular James Bond, minus the snazzy suit and lethal charm. My heart pounded in my chest like a drum at a rock concert, but the search turned up nothing. No scandalous texts, no secret emails, no risk GC selfies. The only suspicious thing was her Google Maps history, which displayed a travel pattern that was more active than a pinball machine. Armed with this information, I decided to go full on Sherlock Holmes. I took meticulous pictures of her travel history, each image a piece of the puzzle I was desperate to solve. With this map of infidelity, I decided it was high time I played hooky from work and did some good old-fashioned stalking. I checked Care.com and saw that the next scheduled sitting service was for Thursday, only 2 days away. It was hard to keep my composure for those 2 days, though I was acting distant and she kept asking me if I was okay. Imagine that, right? So Thursday morning at 7 a.m., I parked my shiny BMW at a rental place and picked up a nondescript sedan that had invisibility written all over it. Looking at my phone, I plotted the course to the first location that was frequented every Thursday, a dingy apartment complex that was as inviting as a used needle. As the morning sun began to warm the city, I nestled into the driver's seat of my rented car, parked strategically to observe, yet remain unnoticed. Sure enough, at 8:30 my wife showed up. She was dressed in a long coat, wearing dark sunglasses that hid half her face, a disguise that would have impressed Carmen Sandiego. The suspense hung in the air, thicker than LA smog. As she approached apartment 315B, a man opened the door. He was a wannabe thug. His fashion choices screamed bad life decisions. He inspected my wife like she was among cattle at an auction, and with a familiarity that made my blood boil. He made her open her coat towards him, but from my angle I couldn't see what she was, or maybe wasn't sporting underneath. The prick even had the audacity to turn her around, lift up the back of her coat and smack her on the ass before turning her back around and pulling her inside. What the actual fuck? The entire incident was recorded in high definition on my phone, so I drove away, my stomach churning like a washing machine on overdrive. I was overwhelmed with a cocktail of emotions: shock, betrayal, anger, and a sprinkle of despair. My wife wasn't just cheating on me. She was doing it with a guy who probably thought Hustle and Flow was a documentary, and this was only the first of many addresses on the list. Realizing that the situation was bigger than I had initially imagined, I decided it was time to call in the professionals. A private investigator seemed like the logical next step. I needed someone to gather evidence from all the addresses my wife had been visiting, someone who could shed light on this secret life that she had been living. So there you have it. My life had turned into a low-budget thriller, and I was the unfortunate protagonist. All because of some extra charges on Care.com. I would have preferred an overpriced gym membership, or even a secret shopping addiction. Anything but this. In the meantime, I'm going to drown my sorrows in cheap whiskey and figure this shit out. After a while, things have taken a turn for the worse. The private investigator, let's call him Bob, because all good detectives need a 2-syllable name, had been on the case for a week. Each day brought more grim revelations, each worse than the last. If my life were a movie, it had definitely switched genres from romantic comedy to a gritty crime thriller. Bob had discovered a disturbing pattern. Every man my wife visited was a cut from the same questionable cloth. A bunch of thugs, the kind of men who viewed respect as an alien concept. They treated my wife as though she were their personal plaything, and I felt a mix of white-hot rage and heart-wrenching despair. One house in particular left an especially sour taste in my mouth. It was a dingy bungalow in the heart of the city's underbelly. The image of several men crowding the doorway, clawing at my wife like starved animals, was permanently seared into my brain. They stripped her of her coat and her dignity, dragging her to a backyard pool as Bob snapped pictures. Each image he brought me was like a punch to the gut. I felt sick, betrayed, and most of all angry. With the pictures in my hand and a bitter taste in my mouth, I began filing for divorce. I delivered every piece of evidence to my lawyer, a stern woman with a gaze that could freeze lava. I was done playing Mr. Niski, but as my soon-to-be ex-wife's indiscretions continued, a seed of vengeance began to sprout in my mind. An eye for an eye, I thought. A plan began to take shape, a scheme so audacious, so outlandishly intricate. It would make the writers of Ocean's 11 green with envy. Revenge was on the horizon, and I intended to serve it as frigid as my estranged wife's heart. The countdown had begun, each tick echoing my resolve. She thought she could play me, use me, and discard me like yesterday's newspaper. But she was gravely mistaken. My story had morphed from a romantic comedy to a crime thriller, and now to a tale of revenge. In this game, I was no longer a pawn. I was the king, and it was time to make my move. And now for the grand finale. Well, everyone, the Pandora's box of betrayal that had popped open in my life showed no sign of closing. The next revelation was a ruthless uppercut to my reality, a blow that had me staggering back on my heels. My wife, my partner of so many years, was under the thumb of a pimp. But this wasn't just any pimp. This man was a specter from her past, a shadow from her high school days that had come back to haunt her and in turn devastate me. The backstabbing didn't end there. As if this news wasn't shattering enough, I discovered that our adorable 2-year-old James wasn't my son. The child I had loved and cared for as my own was the result of an indiscretion. A solitary lapse in judgment during a girls' night out had morphed into a nightmare that was now our reality. The pimp had been well aware of the situation. During that turbulent period, he had been romantically involved with one of my wife's friends, who had inadvertently spilled the beans about the affair. Armed with this explosive information, he had waited, biding his time until he could use this secret to his advantage. When he felt the time was right, he approached my wife. He used the secret as a weapon, a sharp blade against her throat, leaving her with no choice but to comply. She was thrust into a world she had no desire to be a part of. She was sold off to strangers. Her dignity ripped away from her as she desperately tried to keep the truth from reaching me. But like a house of cards in a gust of wind, everything collapsed around her. The sense of betrayal I felt was intense, a raging fire that refused to be doused. Anger fueled my resolve, pushing me to take drastic measures. I amped up our PI efforts, enlisting more professionals to join Bob's team. I needed to know everything, no stone left unturned. In a move reminiscent of an action-packed cyber thriller, I hired an elite hacker, a whiz kid capable of infiltrating even the most secure systems. The goal was to get into the pimp's digital domain and uncover the extent of his depravity. Our hacker was a master of his craft. With a few keystrokes, he broke into the pimp's phone, emails, and Google Drive. What we unearthed was a den of iniquity. The pimp had maintained an extensive roster of women, a detailed list of his clients, and a vast collection of photos and videos that turned my stomach. This incriminating evidence was handed over to my lawyer and the police. Justice was finally served. The ensuing bust was straight out of a Hollywood movie. The pimp and his gang of perverted clients were arrested, thrown behind bars to face the music for their heinous crimes. I guess they'd all just have to have sex with each other now. Throughout this ordeal, I maintained a safe distance from my wife. My focus shifted towards preserving the innocence of my children, creating beautiful memories amidst the chaos that was rapidly unfolding around us. I played the role of the doting father perfectly, ensuring their little minds weren't tainted by the ugliness of adult transgressions. James was no exception to this. I don't care where he came from. He is my child, and I was going to keep it that way forever. If anything, I grew even more protective of him, something I won't let get out of control or unbalanced. But he is so innocent, and I will not let him become a victim of circumstance. My vengeance was aimed at my wife, too. I considered all kinds of ways to get back at her, but in the end, her life imploding was revenge enough. My coup de grace was serving her with the truth, backed with undeniable evidence and divorce papers. I had her meet me at my office one day, and we went into the conference room where I showed her everything. She started to realize just how bad it was when I revealed her pictures and videos were being pushed all over the dark side of the internet. Her face dropped. She was speechless at first. After sitting there sobbing for an hour, she gave a half-hearted attempt at trying to speak an apology to me, weakened by the full knowledge that there was no way in hell I would ever forgive her for any of this. In the end, I told her to keep her composure around the kids, and that they'd be much better off if we didn't present ourselves as two people who were in emotional turmoil, but rather as the people they've always known us for. That is, their parents who both have a strong love for their children. Despite her betrayal and the fact that she walked away with nothing, I wasn't heartless. For the sake of our children, I arranged for a comfortable rental home in a good part of town for her. My world underwent a seismic shift. My home office transitioned into my primary workplace. I hired a capable nanny to look after the children during work hours and began prioritizing family time over work commitments. My life had been turned upside down, but my children's well-being was my North Star, guiding me through this turbulent storm. Through the fog of betrayal and heartache, I saw my children's faces, their innocent smiles, their eyes filled with pure love and trust for their father. This realization became my solace, a healing balm to the gaping wound that my wife's actions had left. I knew then that every decision I made, every action I took, had to be for their welfare. The final act of this sordid saga played out with a heart-wrenching mix of relief and bitterness. As I served my wife the divorce papers, as I laid out the evidence, her life shattered before her, her secret sins laid bare for the world to see. Despite the agony she had put me through, a part of me felt sorry for her. But this wasn't about her anymore. It was about our children, their future. So I made sure she walked away with nothing but a decent place to live, a place she could call home when the kids were with her, a place that promised stability amidst the hurricane that had become her life. The seas were now calm, and as I looked to the horizon, I knew that the future held promise, that the dawn after the darkest night was the most beautiful. And that's the story I want my children to remember, the story of resilience, of hope, and of the unshakable love of a father.